cyber fraud is a fact in life today, unfortunately. It's just like any other crime, in my view. No one questions about, sort of pickpocketing or, sort of cars being broken in. Unfortunate as they are, they happen and people accept them. So I think we have to recognize that the fact that cyber fraud is here to stay because it's so lucrative as well for the criminals. But it's so I think the acceptance, if you like, or the action or lack of action that companies are not taking that concerns me in a sense. I think perhaps it's one of those areas where, because as I say, there's a limit. There is regulation out there for sure, but there's not the regulation I would like to see where potentially companies would be required to take out a level of cyber insurance of cyber, to meet certain criteria, if you like, that they are cyber secure. Yeah, sadly, this is something that I think has always been, or certainly in the last 8 years, there. But it's good that companies like yours are highlighting this, because I think more and more companies need to recognize how serious and how, so permanent this is going to be. So that, and I know we're going to get into this later on, but the issue or the challenge will now next be not, is cyber fraud a big issue? We know it is how do we protect ourselves and how do we make sure that we're cyber secure? And that is a challenge, because as much as we can do as much as we want to try and be cyber secure, the criminals are always going to be that, dare I say, one step ahead, because it's the nature of what they do.
Absolutely.
So if anything, we cannot afford to be in a situation where we're thinking about, should we do this or not? We should be fully engaged and actually looking forward to how we can continue to kind of keep pace, if not be, dare I say, one step ahead of the criminals, if that can be possible. Dare I say, you can split, when it comes to cyber fraud, the landscape into, let's say, large corporates and the not so large corporates. I think with the large corporates, I would expect they're a bit more sophisticated and potentially a bit more invested in terms of financially into cyber security. I'll come back to that in a second. It's the not so large companies I feel potentially in this particular topic are the most vulnerable, for the reason that they are probably not, they don't have the resource or feel or have maybe been prioritized that they need to be cyber secure. There's perhaps also an element of thinking that we're too small for the cyber criminals to be concerned with. Well, that's complete false, because frankly, it's probably and you can see that there's one of the statistics you had early on where 26% of companies are targeted more than 4 times in the last year. And probably those companies are not bothered or think that they're not likely to be victims. But I've read surveys and studies on this, and essentially what they're doing most of the time is they're looking for a loophole or an entry into an organization's infrastructure, and then they don't do anything in terms of, like, you think of a crude criminal, for example, like a burglar. It's an action they will do. They'll break into a house and there's an action there. And sometimes I think companies also expect that with cyber criminals, in that they'll come in sort of guns blazing saying, hey, we're going to hack your system, or, we're going to hold it. No, quite a lot of the time they do it very quietly and agnostically, behind scenes, almost anonymously, I should say, because what they're doing is they're really priming, if you like, or grooming that company for a time when they can get the maximum benefit from whatever criminal activity they want to perpetrate. So I think it does come down to that fact in itself, and that that's what they're initially doing. They're not looking to sort of commit the crime immediately. But unfortunately, what most companies are, and you've seen that from the original, from the first statistic you quoted, which is, I don't think that many companies, or as many companies, are invested into the cybersecurity piece yet. And I think that does come down to this kind of mentality that says, we're too small, or we're never going to be hacked, or we're too, no one's sort of invincible. Even, in companies like Ferguson, we're a large company. I mean, you look at Amazon and, for example, Microsoft as well. They invested billions of dollars in this space, and rightly so. Because I agree absolutely 100% with the result that he got there, which is correct in terms of I always maintain that in terms of cyber fraud, we started off in terms of treasury in my career, and I've been in treasury over 36 years, thinking that that's an IT issue. That's got nothing to do with treasury. We're not IT experts. That's their responsibility. That's completely false. We know that. Actually, cybersecurity is the responsibility of every individual within the company. That's fact. In fact, you could take it to a personal level as well, as you know. So when you look at it from that perspective, you think, okay, so therefore, each individual needs to be well aware and educated and trained and sort of cyber skill or at least cyber aware about the different kind of the common sort of attacks, forms of attack. But what we miss, I think, there is when we think about that, and that's very important, as I say, it's absolutely vital almost, is the way I look at cybersecurity, and it's very kind of crude in a way, certainly for our company. Think of emails. I would say over 80% of the emails that we receive are, spam emails, I should say, are blocked by our firewalls, by our IT department, who are excellent, very good in terms of what they do. But of course, there's always going to be that small percentage, and it might not be as high as 20%, might be lower, but you get the odd that still comes through that you still have to be aware of, the malware links and all those sort of things. So I think what we have to always be aware of is that UI can be, almost superb in spotting all of the individual kind of potential attacks, and that's good. That's very important. But what we can't guarantee and be absolutely certain about is all the other potential entry points that a cyber criminal could find, which we're not fully aware of, particularly now. And I know you haven't mentioned it. I'm going to bring it into the conversation.
Yeah.
AI. Yes. AI is huge. Now, admittedly, we're all focusing, and rightly so, on the positive benefits of AI, which there are a huge number. But clearly, the criminals are equally excited about AI because they know and they are using it to a huge effect or impact. So, again, thinking about how I can be very kind of, let's say, confident about what I'm doing and how I'm, I wouldn't say, I don't think as a human being, anyone can say they're 100% perfect, because we're not. But I can see that 97% statistic you quoted as being probably quite realistic. But what we mustn't forget, and this is the point which comes back to, I suppose, the overall finding of the survey, is we cannot approach this topic from just one angle. It can't be just, our staff are fully trained, we're okay. We don't need anything to do anything else. No, it's a combination of working with IT, with your internal audit, with all your major stakeholders, frankly, making sure you've got the right processes, make sure your staff are trained. This area is not going to go away. Like any new technology, it's going to have negative as well as positive benefits, or say benefits and impacts. So I'm currently, and most people are, I guess, focusing very much the positive of impact of AI. I think it's got huge potential, but like you've rightly pointed out, unfortunately, we cannot ignore the negative impact that it's having, and then that the cyber criminals are going to use. It's an interesting kind of paradox in a way, because the very technology that we believe is going to help us as an economy, as a sort of individual companies, is the very technology that's being used by nefarious perpetrators to try and sort of cause mayhem and destruction. All I can say is that the basics of what we've discussed so far around cybersecurity are still very much relevant. We still need to be aware, we need to be trained, we need to be vigilant, and so on and so forth. But I do believe the answer actually essentially lies in the technology as well. So as much as you rightly pointed out, these deep fakes and you've got the emails that come along, combination of everything we've talked about in terms of training, what have you, but also having the technology to help us. And when I say technology, I'm referring to some of the banks are beginning to do this with introducing biometric ID authentication. What we need to do is make sure we have the appropriate level of appropriate processes and security and technology to ensure we can still do what we are doing today, but just more securely. So I think with AI, I can't, all I can say is that it's the scams only get more sophisticated. I see them on a personal level as well through my own email, as much as sometimes through work, not very often through work, thankfully. But we have to just constantly be vigilant and, as I say, look at what technologies exist out there. Everything you just said, that don't fix it if it ain't broke, is exactly one of the sentiments I picked up when I did a paper looking at, technology in the US, particularly in treasury, and why there wasn't a appetite or traction involved, sort of particularly from treasurers. But it is going back 5 years. I think that's changed significantly today. If you went to the US, certainly from my experience, you'll find a different response to how they engage with technology. But there's some truth in what you say about don't fix it being broke. Now that, I believe, that particular, I'm not saying exclusively, but when I look at treasury today, and this is where it does play an important part, the demographic in treasury has changed, just like anywhere else in the world, in any other company and in society. We've got potentially up to 5 different generations entering the world or in the workplace in the next 2 or 3 years. But what's more important for me is that in the next 2 or 3 years, the boomer generation will effectively retire. So I believe that you've got the next generation coming in, becoming decision makers, shall we say, who will change, I believe, the way that a lot of these statistics are working, particularly in terms of the recognition that, the take up of technology for a start, but also recognizing that, we need to invest in cybersecurity. One of the answers in terms of looking ahead is in collaboration. Now, you mentioned earlier on about how, a lot of companies aren't aware, don't fully appreciate how they could be targets and all that good stuff. But if you look at, and you can imagine the banks, rightly so, have to be very secure. They invest billions, not millions, billions of dollars, the largest banks in this area. Believe it or not, the banks, I've been made aware, are collaborating, because I know we're not experts in this and we hear of it, but we don't necessarily know much about it. And speaking generally here, the dark web, which is where the criminals hang out, right? Well, the banks have their own sources that keep an eye on these areas. And from time to time, they will let us know if they feel that there's something going on in that space that, involves our name, for example. Thankfully, it hasn't happened very often. I think it happened once 5 years ago, I heard from one of our banks. But the point being is that I strongly believe that the way forward for all of us is to collaborate more, where very practical, where possible. And in having these sort of surveys and studies, I think are a great tool, if you like, or at least opportunity to facilitate that as well. I'm a big believer of digital currency, not necessarily cryptocurrency, but digital currency, because that technology behind it, I believe, offers one of the benefits is security, knowing exactly who you're paying to and being absolutely certain that the person you're paying is validated. I think this is, like I said, a step in that direction. Whether it's going to be the final solution or the permanent solution that everyone uses, I'm not so sure. I see perhaps it's kind of an interim step. I think when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, every company, including ourselves, have very stringent policies, processes, rules, if you like, to ensure, trying to ensure that the payments we make are made to validated beneficiaries. And that's as simple as it gets. So whatever process, technology, tool that we can use that can make that, will almost guarantee that, then I think is a good thing. I don't think there's any other option, let's put it that way. Believe it or not, basically, review your processes. Absolutely vital. That's almost a starting point. Make sure you review processes regularly. Make sure that you identify any loopholes. Obviously, ensure your treasury policy is up to date and make sure it's communicated within the group, because that's very important. Sure, and you mentioned this in one of your points, that you have and understand what your cybercrime response process is. Not just who to go to. In smaller companies, you might just have an IT individual. That's fine. But quite often, particularly in large companies as well, but even smaller companies, you need to notify your bank. And so on and so forth. But most large companies like ourselves have a cybercrime response team and a process that we would follow if an event occurred. Ideally, obtain cybercrime insurance. At the moment, it is optional. I wish in some ways, and at some point, it becomes mandatory, because I do believe it's like just taking out normal house insurance, and that's one of the things I see personally. I think this is the other point. Again, it's not a one-stop shop. Look at getting the appropriate level of protection that is necessary for your business. And that's the point, isn't it? Because I did mention large versus small businesses. Large businesses obviously may sort of need a lot more investment, as you'd expect, and resourced in this area, whereas small companies may not. But doesn't mean that they don't look for that level of protection. It just might not be at the same level or scale as a large corporate. They still need, it's like insurance, right? You still need insurance, whether you're a small company or a large company. And then the last bit, but by no means, least important, without question, train your staff. And this is the point, regularly, not just one-off, not just sort of tick a box, say, oh, they trained 5 years ago. This needs to be done regularly. Now, regularly can mean whatever you want, but I say at least once a year, if not perhaps sooner than that. And in terms of training your staff, I would also add in, think about it innovatively. Training doesn't have to follow a particular format. It doesn't have to be just through a webinar but sometimes you might need to do a test, without them knowing. And that's not a bad thing to do as well, because at least then you are controlling potential damage. So if someone were to kind of fall prey to a test phishing, for example, and it's from your own internal company, at least then you've got an opportunity to correct that before it someone externally does that and commit some damage. But no, absolutely, as I say, very simple points. There's no kind of magic bullet here, but very important, very, very important that those points are kind of looked at and taken seriously.